It's all about looking at the business and deciding where you want the business to go, where you want to see the efficiencies and the productivity, where you want to see the innovation and the growth. That then informs your data strategy. And we have a lot of complexity in terms of designing for a sustainable world. So GenAI will help us get to those solutions faster and hopefully more efficiently. So that's how I see AI being able to really accelerate and be a catalyst for developing solutions that we wouldn't have in the past.
Welcome to the Trailblazers podcast, presented by BST Global, where we feature the visionaries who are shaping the future of the AEC industry. My name is Eileen Canady, Director at BST Global, and your host on today's podcast. Joining me today, we have Tembi Hommes, the Global Chief Data Officer at Arup. Welcome, Tembi.
Thank you. Very glad and honored to be here.
Excellent. So maybe we can start off by just kind of giving a little background on Arup and your position at Arup.
Absolutely. When you think about Arup, we think of a company that really wants to shape a better world. That is what attracted me to Arup when I started looking at the history of all the projects that we have supported. If you think about Sydney Opera House, that is our flagship project, a very difficult project that we needed to make sure would be sustainable and would survive the wrath of the seas, the wind, and also will be structurally sound. My role at Arup is to really help the organization become data-driven. I know that sounds like a cliche.
Not at all.
But if you think about it, every firm that is going to be successful in the next coming decades need to truly be data-driven, and that is my role.
Excellent. Well, that does not sound cliche at all. As a matter of fact, you've had a very diverse background coming from accountant all the way through to the CDO. Are there any pivotal moments that took you from the accounting to CDO at Arup?
Yes. My turning point was when I was really frustrated as a finance leader trying to get the numbers right. Okay. And I was supporting at the time a banking client, and they tend to be really mature when it comes to their processes. And I sat there and couldn't understand why it was so difficult to get the numbers right. And a light bulb went on in my head. It was the underlying data. That was a turning point. I started focusing on the data and focusing on the processes that landed the data in my reports. I never turned back since then.
That's excellent. Data. It all starts with the data, doesn't it?
It all starts with the data.
Exactly. So as CDO, you emphasize the need to balance technical expertise and a strong business acumen. And so how do you strike that balance effectively in your day-to-day work?
It's all about looking at the business and deciding where you want the business to go, where you want to see the efficiencies and the productivity, where you want to see the innovation and the growth. That then informs your data strategy. There's a lot of data that's generated by companies and firms. At Arup, we have quite a huge amount of data. We have a lot of systems and applications. I mean, we have almost 3,000 databases.
Wow.
I could try and harness all that data, but if it doesn't drive our business strategy around efficiency and productivity or growth and innovation, then I'm not being a good steward of the data. So it's really making sure you understand where you want to take the company and then how you enable that and how you leverage data and AI to get you to where you need to go.
Well, speaking of data, there's growing concerns about data privacy, ethical concerns. So what are some of the processes that you do at Arup to really manage this data?
It's really about scoping.
Okay.
If you think about the type of work we do and the type of business we do, in B2B, you typically don't have a lot of personal information, for example, because you're not dealing with individuals. But you're also the custodian of data that belongs to your clients. So if you're designing, let's say, a nuclear bunker, or you're designing like a tunnel, right, the BART tunnel or the Second Avenue tunnel in New York, that is very sensitive data and information. So as a custodian, we make sure that we have the security and the guardrails to protect that information so that we don't have players that are nefarious or want to do something nefarious with that data getting access to it very easily. And the key is very easily. You want to make it as difficult as possible and deter nefarious players. Then when it comes to personal information, where you've now got personal information for whatever reason and you're dealing with individuals, we have a lot of mechanisms that help make sure that we either mask that information, we have access controls that make sure people cannot access that information, and in a case where it happens, we also have detective controls that make sure that we find out that has happened and then we remediate. So lots of controls and processes to protect that information.
Wow, that's amazing. Who would have thought years ago there'd be a chief data officer, right? And now, that's where everything starts. Everything starts with the data. So, Arup's mission you mentioned earlier. It's about shaping a better world. Okay, so how do you envision sustainability interacting with AI and data science, and what role does this play in Arup's broader goals?
Some of the solutions that we need to make sure that we have sustainable solutions when we are designing infrastructure, or when we're designing infrastructure and we want to make sure that we have good health outcomes for people that live in those areas, because sometimes people think about sustainability as only carbon footprint, etc. Right. But if you think about it, health outcomes, socioeconomic outcomes, biodiversity in areas where we're putting that infrastructure, that's all part of a sustainable and resilient world. And so if you think about AI, it is actually currently helping us develop solutions that help with making sure our designs are sustainable. And then when you think about generative AI, there are certain solutions that, as human beings, we hit a limit. And we have a lot of complexity in terms of designing for a sustainable world. So Gen AI will help us get to those solutions faster and hopefully more efficiently. So that's how I see AI being able to really accelerate and be a catalyst for developing solutions that we wouldn't have in the past.
Well, that's fascinating, and there's so many complexities to it, but with sustainability, you mentioned it has a lot of pieces to it. So it's not just about the environmental impact; it's also about the social responsibility. So how does Arup address maybe ethical consideration when leveraging this data for AI?
So one of the biggest things that we consider is making sure that whatever decisions we make based on an AI recommendation and a model recommendation, we make sure that there's equitable access to those solutions that we're providing. We have a lot of work that we do in low-resourced locations around the world, and part of it, for example, is making sure that people have water. So if you're going to build a large road, or you're designing a data center, you want to make sure that it does not impact the lives of the people around that, who live around that infrastructure. So we are doing a lot of work in water and making sure that communities where water is a problem are not impacted by some of our designs. So we're really careful about making sure we don't impact the surrounding communities and the surrounding people around whatever it is that we're designing or that we're putting in place.
And do you utilize technology to help you analyze and identify these areas?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't get me started. I could talk about so many applications and so many toolkits that we have developed in Arup. So think about the earthquake in Turkey that happened, and Arup really mobilized very quickly. One of the things about an earthquake is the aftershocks, or what happens to the buildings. You might not know that there's significant damage in that building. And the assessment over a broad area can be really slow.
Okay.
And people are at risk. So we leverage technology to be able to use VR and scan buildings, get the data into an application that quickly looks at the parameters that says, is this building safe or not? And actually get a really quick answer, where we could tell you on the spot that this was actually not a safe building. Wow. And then as a follow-up, you then have the longer assessments. But you could quickly really tell with the technology we built at the time that that building, you probably know, shouldn't be in it. And then obviously we'll come in and tell you the details afterwards. But that was a very quick mobilization of technology and people and a little bit of machine learning to really kind of help accelerate some of the solutions. So yes, we do leverage a lot of technology.
Well, that's amazing, and that makes me really happy because I mean, I feel like there's more and more natural disasters happening, earthquakes and tornadoes, tsunamis.
Yeah.
I mean, globally, and so I'm very thankful for this technology and what Arup's been able to do. In regards to overall technology,
Yep.
Is there a top priority for Arup, or is there something you might recommend for the AEC industry to kind of focus on to help with the development, of your company?
We want to shape a better world.
Yes.
So our main mission is to really drive sustainable outcomes in the work that we do and in the work that we do as an industry. And so some of the work we've done, and when I joined Arup a year ago, well, it's about 15 months now, I discovered an application. Well, I didn't discover it, it was there, but there was an application that Arup had already built called Zero. And what it did was to take a look at all our designs and start assessing the carbon footprint of those designs. This is something we developed at Arup. But if you think about the amount of information and data around materials, your carbon factors that need to go into that calculation, it is pretty complex. And even getting the data and translating it into how we can use it is very complex. So as an industry, I think there's a conversation to be had around baselining of how we calculate the carbon footprint of all our designs and the carbon footprint that's embedded in our infrastructure. Not one organization can do it. So it's a conversation that I feel across the different players in there. There's probably a conversation to be had, a discussion to be had, a data aggregation to be had, an agreement on standards and standards of how do we actually do this calculation, because everybody does it differently.
Right. And networking with peers, getting into consortium, getting into some sort of agreement. I think that's a fantastic idea, and hopefully we can continue that.
The trick then becomes sharing of information.
Yes.
We talked about privacy earlier.
Yes.
We typically think of privacy in the sense of personal information.
Right.
But if you think of privacy in the sense of IP,
right.
There is a lot of IP embedded in all our designs. So as we have conversations in peers, it's getting to that level of trust around sharing that IP and putting it together for the greater good. And that's a difficult ask, I must say.
It really is. Absolutely. And Arup, under your leadership and your peers, you're pretty far along the path on incorporating digital and some of these technology components. Did you have to basically change the way, the types of employees that you hire? I know not necessarily just designers and engineers. I mean, there's different types of skill sets that are needed to analyze data like this. So if you can tell me a little bit about your hiring strategy and what that looks like.
The lovely thing about companies like ours is we have very talented people. So our engineers, most of them learn the digital world really quickly.
Excellent.
I have a team that has people that used to be civil, mechanical, structural engineers that are now digital folks. They're now data engineers.
Wow.
Some of them have gone as far as becoming software developers. So in terms of the hiring strategy, or the talent strategy, if I may say, it's upskilling within the firm, people that are more interested in either having a dual world. I have people in my team that are 50% on the actual engineering side and design side, and I have a 50% digital. So it's upskilling internally, and then also making sure that we are finding opportunities to bring in people as either apprentices or interns, or working with universities to get those people in for time and help us really accelerate some of the things that we need to do. We've also been looking globally. We're a global firm, so we leverage talent globally, not just in one location. And that's really helped with kind of getting the mix of people that we need. So, for example, Arup is headquartered in the UK.
Okay.
We have offices around the world. I'm, as a global leader, sitting in the Americas. That's a true example of leveraging our global reach to find leaders or resources or people where we can.
That's amazing, and I'm hearing that more and more, that companies are upskilling existing talent, finding folks in the organization who have that passion, and then training and developing within, which is amazing, wonderful.
I have a friend who is they have a firm that they deliver some training, and he came up with this term that I actually said to him, I'm going to take it from you. So when he hears this, I'm taking this from you. His name is Ujwal, I'm taking that from you. He developed a term called continuous workforce transformation.
Oh, okay.
And I love it because what he's saying is you're not training on the technology. You're upskilling on the competencies that you need your firm to have in the next 10 years and the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is if you have continuous workforce transformation, every 24 months you look back and say, what's happened? We now have generative AI. So you train up on the competencies that your firm needs to be able to leverage Gen AI. So you're not necessarily saying you need to learn Gen AI. You're saying let's train the competency that allows you to leverage it. Whether it's data analysis, whether it's data interrogation, whether it's data engineering, regardless of what the technology is. And as your tech stack evolves, you focus on the competencies, and then you, by default, if you're training a competency, the use case will be sitting on your tech stack. I fell in love with that concept because it really helps with changing the conversation from technology to competencies and capabilities and processes that your firm needs to be able to leverage that new technology.
I love that concept as well. Amazing. So speaking of the next 5 to 10 years, what do you see some of the big changes that may occur within our industry?
I do think there's something to be said about our commercial models.
Okay.
And I know that's a controversial topic, but our industry, our model is T&M, time and materials. Now, you could argue and say with AI, as we begin to leverage more AI, don't you think we should be getting some productivity gains in our work? So if somebody is using a giant Excel spreadsheet, an engineer or a designer is using a giant Excel spreadsheet to do some calculation or simulation, and now they're leveraging a next-gen technology that also has machine learning in it, isn't there an argument there to say, well, we should be charging for value? The domain knowledge that comes with that engineer or designer, not necessarily the amount of time it's taking them to do this calculation simulation. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I see a conversation around our commercial model in our industry.
I couldn't agree more. The value-based versus time-based, and that's those conversations are starting to happen, and I can see it as well. And speaking of the value, oftentimes when companies use technology in their process, maybe clients say, well, this took you half the time, and so explaining the value. And then also from a talent standpoint, there is conversation out there that AI could replace some human talent. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, I don't think AI will replace human talent. I think when you think about confidence and validity of results when you've used AI, you need somebody that is going to validate that. Even Gen AI, there's no way of knowing it's correct. And the amount of training you need to do on a model to get that level of accuracy and precision is very expensive. There's a reason a lot of us are dabbling in pilots, POCs, and kind of waiting to see where things are going to go next, because it is a very expensive investment. So you are always going to need that human that says, yes, this makes sense, and based on my expertise and domain knowledge, this makes sense. So I do think we're going to see a change in the ways of working, not necessarily a replacement. So if I'm an engineer, whereas I might spend a lot more time doing the calculations myself, I might actually spend up more time doing the checking rather than the execution piece. So I see a change in the ways of working and the type of work rather than a complete replacement. I don't think we're there yet.
I don't think we're there yet.
I don't think we're there yet.
To be quite honest, I'm not sure we'll ever fully be there, because there's always some sort of human element in the loop. Somebody needs to train the model, right?
I think so.
Exactly.
I think the roles that might be replaced are, if I think about, let's say we talked about finance accounting, right? If I think about creating a financial report, right? Those sort of roles might be replaced, because now you train a model to actually do it. It will do it.
Right.
Right. So the people that were spending time doing that calculation and creating the report, yes, those roles might be replaced. But my hope is that they upskill and become the checkers.
Right.
That's my hope.
Exactly. It's just maybe shifting types of work, but maybe
Shifting
not
types of
necessarily
work, yes.
shifting all of the work, right? So, as a CDO, what advice might you give to aspiring young professionals who are looking to grow and develop? Are there any skills that they should be focusing on? Any advice for those folks navigating to this career progression?
I would say, don't be scared to roll up your sleeves and actually get into the weeds and get into the details. And you don't necessarily have to be very deep into the details, right? So if you ask me to write a program end to end, I cannot do it. It is not something that I wanted to do. But I went deep enough to understand how to do it. I can code, but not as deep as I do not want to compete with a software developer. That is not the path I wanted to go. So I went deep to understand the domain and to have hands-on experience in that domain, but then I went broad to be able to then rise to the level of an executive, which is what I wanted to do. And that comes with a lot more other skill sets other than going very deep. I come across a lot of mentees that want to really go deep, and that's fine if you want to become a technical lead or you want to grow as a technical expert. But if you want to get to an executive level as a leader, as a chief data officer, as a chief technology officer, there's a lot more skill sets that are needed around executive presence, around communication, managing people, empathy, compassion. There's a lot more rounded skills that you also need to work on in addition to the technical expertise. So, I mean, I'll tell a little story when I said I had that light bulb moment
Yes.
of I want to change my career and move into data management.
Yes.
I was very frustrated, and I said, look, why don't I go, the team that was developing the reports was in India. Why don't I go to India and actually sit next to the developers and understand what they do? Rolled up my sleeves, we started doing together. I found that I liked it. I came back and self-trained and self-taught and took a couple of courses, and then started really making sure I was put on projects where my focus was data management. But I had to really spend a lot of time in the trenches, at the lower levels, really getting my expertise a little bit more developed. So I would say, don't worry about, don't focus too much on, I want to become an executive. Right. Know your domain, know your expertise, decide whether you want to go deep or you want to go broad. And that should help with the decision around which path you go.
That's great advice. Go broad and understand the path. I've heard the phrase, there's no elevator to the top. You've got to take one step at a time, and learn and progress. So so on that note, I have two final questions for you. What would be the best advice that someone gave you personally? And part two of this question is, if you were to give yourself advice 25 years ago, hypothetically, what would you tell yourself?
The best advice somebody gave me was my manager at Peloton.
Okay.
Shobes, she's great. She said, always make sure people have their dignity. It has served me well as a leader in managing people and in my interactions. Always make sure people have their dignity. Leave people with their dignity.
I love that. I really love that.
And I always remind myself, even when somebody's not performing or I'm frustrated or a project is derailing, I always remind myself to leave people with their dignity.
I love that. That's amazing advice. And oftentimes I've been asked too, gosh, I want to manage. I want to be a manager, and I want to manage people. And sometimes when you're talking about domain expertise, that's the easy part compared to people, because everybody has their unique challenges. Everyone has their unique skill sets, and I think that understanding people is really a big part of it. So, yeah. And then if you went back 25 years, is there something that you might tell yourself back then in order to help maybe enhance your career? Is there anything that you would, or at least guide your career?
I think I would have just told myself, just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Love it.
I finally made a couple of changes and moves in my career that took me a much longer time to get to than if I just made the decision to act. I think sometimes we give ourselves reasons and excuses, and we don't necessarily take the actions we need to. And then when you finally get to it, actually you realize this is where I wanted to be. I think somebody once said, you don't regret the things you do or the actions you took. You regret the things you did not do or the actions you did not take. So just do it.
Isn't that the truth?
Just
do
do
it. I love it.
There's a reason Nike said that.
Exactly. There's a reason. They're kind of famous. Tembi, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining today.
This has been amazing. Thank you for hosting me, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
So did I. Thank you again. And thank you to our audience for joining us today on the Trailblazers podcast. Until next time, take care.